Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen.
And my name is Katie. And we want to spend a few minutes a day with you walking through the New Testament, one chapter at a time. This year, we will fix our gaze upon Christ so that we may know him, not only with our minds, but with our hearts.
Together, we will learn that who Jesus is changes everything. Welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Kristen Schmucker, and we are finishing the book of Luke today. As a reminder, I'm using the Behold study guides from the Daily Grace Co., as well as the free reading plan, and you can find all that information in the show notes. We are in the final chapter of the book of Luke. At the very end of Luke 23 that we read yesterday, we saw the women that had watched Joseph lay Jesus in his own tomb, and they had immediately gone to prepare burial spices and perfume. When they arrived early Sunday morning, the tomb was empty, but they didn't know why. This new day had brought new mercies. 2 men in dazzling clothes appeared. These angels asked them why they would look for the living among the dead. Suddenly they remembered the words of Jesus, who said he would be raised again on the 3rd day. The other Gospels tell us specifically of Mary and her interaction with the risen Jesus, though that is not detailed for us in Luke. Augustine calls these women the first preachers of the resurrection, but the disciples that heard the news thought it sounded like sheer nonsense. Our attention shifts to the road to Emmaus. This account is one of my favorites and is found only in the Gospel of Luke. Cleopas is traveling with a companion. Some believe that this unnamed disciple may be his wife. The two are disappointed, sad, confused, and heartbroken. The 2 travelers talked about all they had seen take place when Jesus himself came near to them. Jesus asked them what they were talking about, and they were shocked that he did not seem to know all that had taken place. So they told him all that had just occurred in Jerusalem. Jesus, who was still unrecognizable to them, told them the story of Scripture, the story of the Messiah from the Old Testament. All of Scripture points to Jesus, and they heard how directly from Jesus. From the law to the prophets, he interpreted all of Scripture while they listened intently. When they arrived at their destination, they just didn't want him to leave. They seemed to be amazed by his knowledge of Scripture and his immense wisdom on the road. But something different happened at the table. The meal looked similar to another meal just a few chapters before. We see in the description of this encounter shadows of the Last Supper Jesus shared with his disciples before his death. Suddenly their eyes were opened, and that quick he was gone. But I would venture a guess that these 2 would never be the same. They described their hearts burning within them as they heard him explain the Scriptures. They were forever changed. We then see Jesus appear to the disciples. They are speaking, and he appears in their midst. They behold his resurrection body, not just his ghost, as they thought. Jesus urges the questioning disciples to touch him. I love how in 1 John 1:1, John includes the details of touching Jesus. He says, "What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have observed and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life." The disciples didn't just hear about the resurrection. They didn't even just see it with their eyes. They touched his body, the body that just days before had been lifeless when taken down from the cross and placed in the tomb, now stood before them. His heart beat and his chest rose with each breath. They looked in his eyes. He preached to them on that first Easter, and finally they understood. The book ends with Jesus in flesh, ascending to heaven and returning to his glorious throne, having completed the work that he had come to do. He ascended in the human flesh that he had come to take on and now sits in perfect humanity and deity on the throne of heaven. He became like us in flesh, and he always will be. Today we behold Jesus. We remember all that we have seen of him in the book of Luke. We behold him as a humble infant. We see how he perfectly lived in a way that we never could. We see the one who poured out mercy from a heart of compassion. We see Jesus on the road to Calvary, stripped and beaten for love and for our salvation. We see him as the risen and glorious King. We see him as the one who all of Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, proclaims. And we behold him, the one who has taken on flesh and reigns now and forevermore. We behold Jesus, and we are forever changed.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. Don't forget to check out the show notes for helpful links and resources related to today's episode. And make sure you are following at Daily Grace Podcast on Instagram for more A Year in the Bible content, and at the Daily Grace Co. for all things Bible study resources. We can't wait to study again with you tomorrow. Bye, friends.